Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Okay, let me see if I can get this up and running. Okay. Hopefully that's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Mary's going to start.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what people can see on the screen. Can people see the other participants?
I can see everyone down the right-hand side, and then I can see the slides as my main screen.
Good. Okay.
Yes, yeah, as well.
Excellent.
I'm Mary Mooney, and I'm an adjunct professor at Western Sydney University, a drama educator, researcher, TIE practitioner, theatre teacher educator. I'm Vice President of Drama Australia and the drama representative on the National Advocates for Arts Education. Over to you, Christine.
And I'm Chris Hatton from the University of Newcastle. I'm a senior lecturer there, and I research in drama and creative arts, and I teach pre-service teachers in the creative arts and in drama.
We'd like to acknowledge the homelands of all Aboriginal people and pay our respects to country, including the Wabakal country, where Chris Hatton is located, and the Wongal country, where Mary Mooney, is located. And we acknowledge the ancestors who've been traditional owners of the country for thousands of years, and pay our respects to the elders past and present and future emerging leaders. We also acknowledge the devastation to communities due to the bushfire crisis in Australia, but as well to the many other global crises about land, community and culture. We welcome all participants. We have 13 at the moment, which is great, from around the world, who are coming together to share stories and knowledge about teaching, learning and the arts in this online think tank for ITAC. Our topic today is artists and school partnerships, developing a creative ecology. We have some creative school ecology resources, but the aim of the think tank is to share our findings of a study of teaching artists and arts teachers collaborating together in Sydney schools in Australia, and to generate a discussion with you about this field of research in collaborative arts curriculum and pedagogy. And so you can read our report, which is there, the second one on the research blog, and the web address is there. And there's a book chapter that also talks about the creative school ecology model. So over to you if you want to read some more after this. The overall study of the New South Wales Fresh Air, which is Artist in Residence School Initiative, took place over a period of 3 years from 2014 to 2016. And the Australia Council were interested in long-term artist in residence rather than just quick 3 weeks of artists going into schools. So it was a new model they were trialling at the time. And there were 3 projects in Sydney with 3 different artist in residence models. And those 3 projects, 6 schools were involved. And the key participants were artists, teachers and students. The primary and secondary schools were involved. And they were partnered by arts organisations and the Department of Education. The first project was 3 secondary schools, and they welcomed 3 visual arts artists each year. The project was art teacher designed and administered. The second project was in a kindergarten to year 12 community school that welcomed 4 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists, 1 dancer in the first year, 2 musicians in the second year, and 1 visual art artist in the third year of the project, where the school was in partnership with an arts organisation who designed the program and administered the artists. And the third project was the Room 13 model. That was 2 schools, 1 primary and 1 secondary, with one multimedia artist over the 3 years and with additional artists in the other years. So that was a bit of a combination. And the two schools are in partnership with an arts organisation as well, who designed the program and administered the artists. Collaborative participation in a sustained 3 years Fresh Air project generated a creative school ecology that triggered radical possibilities as artistry in schools was publicly activated. In our study, the characteristic of radical became one that gently or robustly shifted the ground, structures, capacities or behaviours of the participants for the benefit of an equitable arts education where students took agency for their learning. A radical school ecology began when a pedagogy of possibilities emerged within these democratic school contexts.
Okay, so a creative school ecology. So the core finding from our 3-year study found that when residencies are sustained over time, there is potential for a school creative ecology to develop. In our analysis of the creative school ecologies that emerged in these schools, we've used Csikszentmihalyi's systems perspective of creativity, where creative acts are shaped by time and place as individuals respond to domains and fields in culture and society. This provides an ecological framework from which we can analyse the relationships between individuals and their environment and their interactions to support that system. Bronfenbrenner's proposed that the ecology, and we're using Bronfenbrenner's 1979 model of the ecological systems theory of human development. This model we've adapted and we were attracted to it because it is characterised by a series of nested structures, the actual organisation of it, that impact human development and the interactions of the individual within those structures. And we adapted and used his model to capture what we thought intersected and moved across the layers in a creative ecosystem, identifying the features that impact the level of the system. And you can see those in our intersecting vectors that cut across the circles that operate in a sustained artists and schools partnership. In our study of sustained residencies over 3 years, time allowed these intersections to develop, providing an opportunity for us as researchers to identify the key arts elements that contributed to the growth and the maintenance of a school creative ecology. And these are, as you can see from this diagram, arts pedagogies, arts practices, arts processes, products and audiences. So those cut across all of those different layers of the system. Each layer of the creative ecological system interacted in some way with these elements, which in turn impacted the students and their creative development and engagement over time. So the creative school ecology we found becomes then a dynamic and organic system that's responsive to change over time and supports and sustains the integrity of that core relationship that we were focusing on between students, artists and teachers within the school community context. We found that an ecological framework actually best characterised the layers of the system, as well as the depth of the interrelationships that emerged over that time. The sustained engagement of artists in residence allowed for stronger and deeper relationships to grow in the schools and the communities. If you're interested in reading more about theorising and research about creative ecologies in schools, we'd suggest, you may not know, but a researcher in Australia who's doing amazing work in this area, Anne Harris, Associate Professor Anne Harris from RMIT, has conducted research and has numerous publications on creative school ecologies. So you might want to follow that up. Okay, let's talk about the radical relationships we observed over time. So one of the key findings of our study was that the sustained residencies in our research project provided time to connect, time to engage, and this deepened the core relationships between artists, teachers, and students. This enabled transformation, the growth of empathy and awareness, excellence to flourish within these schools. These residencies between artists, teachers, and students allowed for radical interventions and interactions, collaborations that were both formal and informal. Sustained engagement and the depth of relationship generated and enabled new skills and understandings for the participants that were about themselves, about each other, and the arts, so broader than just the arts. It was most significant for the students as their expectations of the artist changed over time as they developed greater agency and artistry. So in some cases, they got more demanding and had higher expectations of the artist. The projects enabled sustained arts access over 3 years, where there was a democratisation of culture and creativity. We're using Hall and Thompson's reference there, resulting from those sustained relationships. In these projects, students are not simply recipients of the good stuff from short-term injections of the arts and artists. They themselves become artist students, and they're a key part of that ecology flourishing. The sustained relationships in schools became the catalyst for change in self, relationships, community, operating at multiple levels within that ecological system.
Okay, the radical practices. One of the key findings was the reciprocity between the artists and the teachers, which directly and positively impacted student agency and enabled and leveraged students as artists to experiment and create new ways of responding to their world. The Fresh Air study informed us about the effect of artists and teachers working alongside each other on students' arts practice over that sustained period of 3 years. So some of this was that students viewed artists as being real and authentic connections to the art world, thus providing a purpose to their art making. And the students' relationships with professional artists in the classroom provided self-efficacy, especially when artists, together with teachers, organised exhibitions of their artwork. And the students developed a new work ethic from working alongside the artists. Students recalled what the artists said to them, such as, keep trying, even if you don't like it. Be open to ideas, stand up for yourself. Learn what you're capable of. Also, students in the Fresh Air classes who had been identified as at risk and or non-participative were less likely to be given a behaviour referral to see the principal. One school principal provided the following reason. Because the kids are so engaged, there were fewer dropouts from the arts subjects due to the Artist in Residency project. Students observed by a primary teacher learnt more than their arts practice when working alongside the puppeteer. Things like problem solving, collaborative learning, listening, being independent, brainstorming, and thinking creatively. And again, students in making art in room 13 in project 3, project 2, no, project 3, yep.
Mm-hmm.
We're more willing to take risks rather than saying, oh, I can't do that. And another finding, that collaborations of artists with teachers can be attributed to scaffolding student agency as artists. The visual arts specialist teachers told us they improved their teaching practice by developing new art making skills, which increase their confidence in arts capacities when working alongside 6 professional artists 1 day per week over 3 years, and attending their artists' workshops, observing the artists making their own art. And as one of the teachers described, it was like a living artist was in the room, in the classroom, and injected us with enthusiasm and motivation. And the artists challenging of aligning their arts practices to the requirements of visual arts curriculum in the schools provided a model of application for the students who also had to work within the curriculum.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the other finding that we came across in our analysis of radical dialogue. Sustained arts residencies can provide the time, space and occasion for deep, authentic and radical dialogue in schools. In a sustained air relationship, dialogue is multi-directional, where all key players are engaged, artists, teachers and students. In the creative school ecologies we studied, space was made for new ideas to flourish, for the recognition of difference, for the development of artistic, personal, cultural and political exchanges that enabled a new interrogation of how the arts functioned in the schools and how they were perceived as a living practice. The sustained relationships we studied fostered creative pedagogical spaces for students to encounter the possibilities of agency and resistance. And this is a radical prospect in today's schools. Students were enabled to be artists, critics and performers in ways unlike any previous experiences they'd had in the arts or in their schooling. The sustained presence of the artist was a radical change for students and teachers in these schools. Time built relationships and provided opportunities for radical dialogue and change to grow organically in these ecologies. And of course, over that time and in those multiple schools and with multiple artists, we observed different types of what we called radical enabling dialogue to occur in these projects, as well as the practices that they engaged in. And we'll give you a kind of a bit of a smattering of what we're characterising as that radical enabling dialogue between artists and students particularly. Whoops, back again, I've gone too far. Okay, the first was about the arts world, dialogue, radical dialogue about the arts world via the artist. The artist brought the wider arts world into these suburban classrooms and often with disadvantaged students. The artists provide illuminations about their artistic practice, their art world connections, their social, political and cultural views, and their current artworks, which gave students and teachers new insights and direct access to the contemporary arts world. But of course, the dialogue between artists and students and teachers is inactive. The sustained residencies gave opportunities for different types of enabling dialogue to develop, where artists engaged with students as they shaped students' learning and emerging arts practice. And also with teachers, as the artists often led professional development workshops or interactions with teachers during that time. The residencies generated ways for participants to weave imaginative connections between self, story, place, culture, and arts practice. The artists we saw were enablers within the school context, noticing, coaxing, cajoling, leading, validating, and engaging with the arts practice of both the students and the teachers. The artists directly impacted students' perceptions about their own arts practice and their access to creative risk-taking. The artists developed students' and teachers' capacities to experiment by encouraging dialogue around the art-making processes they were engaged in. So some examples from our data of this enabling dialogue we've kind of categorised in different ways. There's the technical enabling dialogue, quoting some of our participants, the artists. Painting is all about layers. The grid is like a map. Everything can be fixed with the right amount of paint. Or there's possibility-seeking dialogue. Can I make a suggestion? What do you want to try today? Facilitative dialogue that's coming from the artists. Go on, do it, darling, drum roll. It's fabulous. You can do this. Or interrogative dialogue. Who are you? What do you see? Where are we? What do we have at our fingertips or in the grounds of the school? What is the word for water in your language? Or the dialogue could be social and political. One artist said, gender has nothing to do with this, when she was talking about sewing in a co-educational classroom and textile art. Or we've become detached from our food sources, discussing politics and veganism. Or other artists, why is it important to be comfortable with difference? One artist in the second year of the self-managed secondary school model, Project 1, said, I've looked at things like nationalism and xenophobia and the perceptions of Muslims in a contemporary Australian landscape. What's going on now with young migrants or children of migrants, and that sense of dislocation, and identifying those differences and coming to terms with it, as opposed to being anxious or forming any type of anxiety about it, but being comfortable with that difference. And the last type of enabling dialogue that we identified was aspirational dialogue. And this dialogue involved active, responsive, and extended role modelling. The development of sustained relationships allowed for vistas of possible futures to open up for the students, sometimes exploding the students' perceptions of potential barriers to artists, allowing for the transgression of deficit ideas about social class, cultural background, and geography. We could also talk about the dialogue that happened between teachers and artists, but we don't have time in this presentation. We just wanted to focus on the students. The other type of dialogue we looked at was curriculum dialogue between all three groups of participants, artists, students, and teachers. And there was important radical dialogue about the curriculum. It occurred in explicit ways, but also more subtle ways, as the artists were deeply embedded in the school context. Project 1, the teacher-designed and administered model of residency, which explicitly targeted the visual arts curriculum in the residency design and management. In this project, the students worked extensively with the artists in elective classes, with also specialist visual arts teachers working in tandem. The artists in those classrooms became living, breathing examples of the contemporary arts world that could be the subject matter of students' curriculum inquiry and study. The teachers would engage pedagogically and critically with the artists and their practice in order to bring the curriculum to life. The artists, in a sense, became the curriculum in that project, where their practice was used as case studies for analysis and writing, and also their material practice was used to guide the students' own art-making processes. And this resulted in a highly contemporary visual arts curriculum being adopted in those schools, and it raised the stakes and excellence of the students' art-making. Whilst this benefited the curriculum implementation from a teacher's point of view, being the curriculum was actually problematic for some artists too. In this project, for some artists, it showed how stultified the curriculum was when they discovered that their work was codified and translated as a curriculum object rather than as living practice. Some artists found it difficult or strange to see their work translated into curriculum language in print and by the teacher. One artist stated in an interview, "But I'm here, I have an art practice." And I think that in itself is amazing as an example, because the students, I'm real, I exist in real time. I don't exist in a catalogue or a poster. The other residencies in our study, the other two, focus more broadly on arts practice or co-curricular work, and sometimes operated outside specific curriculum demands. And so curriculum was less of a focus in that one. But we thought that idea about curriculum life might be interesting to you in your practice. Here.
Okay, radical spaces is another impact of the project. And one of the key findings is that artists in residence programs sustained over that 3 years did have a significant impact on the social, academic and emotional relationships in the school community by building the students' creative and cultural capital. Also, artistically opening up the learning spaces that build connections between art making and exhibiting or performing at school and in the broader community were more radical when artists and external arts agencies or organisations stepped in to work alongside the teachers and students and stepped up to support the students and teachers' participation in public events external to the school. So what does radical spaces that are community aligned look like? Well, they can look like a professional arts agency welcomed into schools, working best when the school experiences immediate connections between the broader art world and the world of the school connected. Radical spaces can look like school partnerships and relationships with places such as local government council and the Sydney's National Arts School, which provided credibility to the teachers, artists and students. A radical space can look like exhibitions and performances, popping up in the school and community galleries, at the Black Arts Market, and state-based competitions showcasing the works of students and artists to a broader audience. Radical spaces can look like Room 13, which is based on the international network of Room 13s, designed to encourage a student-run art studio with young people working alongside professional artists in residence. In this way, the school and the local community grew a visible arts culture through profiling arts events and exhibitions, such as an outdoor gallery. So, and another impact of community-aligned radical spaces, this one. Accolades started rolling in when one of the schools embraced radical arts practices, such as a secondary school, whose students' peace tiles were exhibited at the school's Peace Day. But that's not all. This space gets more radical. They go on to win the Sydney Peace Prize and more. An international artist, George Gittos, selected 20 of the winning students' tiles to exhibit in his Yellow House Gallery in Afghanistan. Not a bad impact. And then some artists were more deeply interrogative of the students' relationship to their communities and used the arts projects to move beyond the let's showcase the school idea to a more embedded and integrated approach where communities learned about the stories and lives of the students. An example of this is the Model 3, which was Room 13, where a community engaged model sought to negotiate students' access to community and vice versa. The impact of radical spaces that are curriculum-based. Well, a key challenge for the artists was to align their practice to the requirements of the arts curriculum in schools. In working through this challenge, radical arts learning spaces did evolve and a multitude of artistic and academic expectations were realised. Also, the scope of the challenge grew. The artists, together with the teachers, shifted the students' work from a private space, the art studio classroom, into a public context. A principal of one of the schools said the fresh air students made a whole body of work which was incredibly intimate and detailed, which was a giant sort of emotional map with a series of really beautiful portrait songs and spoken word poems. And then that work was staged and framed, and those young people came to the public event and saw their work being appreciated in a public context.
Okay, to conclude, we finish our sharing with the words of this 15-year-old participant, and her words for us, remind us to focus on arts partnerships that grow strong over time, so that we can flex the amazing muscles of the arts to transform schools into creative ecologies. We encourage you, like the participants in these models, to consider what becomes possible when artists work alongside teachers in sustained residencies, and to focus on the benefits for students and teachers in the schools as deep collaborative arts partnerships that grow creative ecologies can happen. And how do we leverage the community building in and beyond the walls of the classroom? Radical arts education in schools is about shifting the paradigm of education. It's not about parallel worlds meeting in the middle in a school environment, but truly reciprocal partnerships. We are all shackled by the systems that control and undermine us, and teachers are deeply entrenched, but with time, willing to subvert where they can. Work with those teachers and find those principals who become champions for sustained change. Work together to change the paradigm of education to develop creative ecologies in the schools you work in. Thank you for listening today. What we'd like to do now is open this up to discussion now, where hopefully you've been perhaps jotting down making a few mental notes about what triggers your interest and relationship to your context. And we're keen to find out how some of our findings can help you reflect on the relationships and ecologies within your practice and context. So what we would like to do is to open it up now to discussion, and we'll use those sort of 4 themes from our findings as a kind of a framework for this discussion. So have a think about which one you'd like to engage with, whether it's relationships, dialogues, spaces, or practice. And we'd ask you to speak to one of them that most affects you and your context that you work in. And we'd like to hear from as many of you as we can in the time that we've got left. So we'd ask you perhaps to speak only for maybe 1 to 2 minutes, and to preface what you say with just an introduction of your name, your country, and what field of arts work you are from. So whether you're an artist or you could be all of these things, whether you're a classroom teacher or a researcher, we'd like to know that. But speak for a couple of minutes on the topic that you'd like to talk about, the one you'd like to talk about. And we'll go through these sort of chronologically so we get to hear from hopefully everybody in the group. So the first one, we've kind of turned our themes into questions for you to just sort of help you kind of get your mind around which one you want. So the first one is, what are the radical spaces in your work that are community aligned, artistically open and curriculum based, that play between that dynamic between safety and risk? Second one, what are the radical relationships in your work that evolve into creative school ecologies determined by qualities of the relationship between the artist and teacher and student? Thirdly, what radical dialogue in your work enables new conversations and exchanges of viewpoints and politics that challenge the codification of arts practice in the curricula? And the last one is, what is the radical practice of an artist with a teacher in your work that you have observed? And if so, does it act as an artistic lever and scaffold to develop student agency as artists? So pick one of those that you perhaps might like to engage with, and it'd be great if we could hear your comments and reflections based upon your context. So who would like to kick us off with the first one, the radical spaces?
I'd like to kick off with that one, not least because I'm aware I have to actually leave in minutes.
Okay, so your name and your country and your...
So I'm Victoria Ryle, and I'm down in Tasmania, so I'm in the same country, in the same time zone as you.
Yay.
And hopefully, well, I'm in less smoke than you, and I want to just acknowledge now that it's been a very difficult time for everybody living on the eastern seaboard of Australia.
Yeah.
And I think it has captured the attention of the world quite rightly.
Yes.
And this is where arts and creative ecologies, I think, have a huge role to play in the future, fast changing, moving future. But I'm going to play devil's advocate and say I think that's also the politicization of the climate and climate science is perhaps linked to the fact that the arts have been underfunded and progressively underfunded over the last few years. And I don't think that's a coincidence. You know, my radical thinking has brought me to a point where I think there cannot be a coincidence that despite overwhelming evidence, and you know, your impact study is so important, but I'm afraid that it will be disregarded because it comes from within the arts. And we have seen sustained attacks on, you know, the efforts to shift the paradigm in education when there is so much evidence. So I suppose when it comes to radical spaces, I just want to bring up that I attended and presented at the Public Pedagogies conference, which is a very small conference held in Melbourne at the end of November, but it had worldwide attendance. And I was really struck by the radical dialogue and how, although schools were mentioned, that essentially public pedagogies is looking at how education is enacted in public spaces, as it says. So it was asking people to present on the other spaces where educational projects were happening, particularly focused on, so it's mainly arts education would be the two areas that were represented at this public pedagogies conference. But I was also struck by it being very multi and interdisciplinary. And it just made me think for the first time after many, many years of working in the field, why is it that I have seen considerable impact from the work I've undertaken in the space of co-publishing books with children as authors when it's happened in public spaces, but there's been less impact when it has been enacted in schools. Now, obviously, we would all understand some of the reasons. They're very obvious, to do with time restraints, pressures on teachers, limited curricula, and so on. But it did just strike me that actually I started to step back and think about work that has really flourished, that started in libraries, for instance, or through arts organizations, through things like the Indigenous Literacy Foundation that now has a huge and thriving community publishing arm to its work that I like to think that I was part of initiating about 10 years ago. And so there's huge impact in some of that work that's happened in public spaces. So I suppose when we talk about the radical spaces, I would say, first of all, that the radical spaces in the recent past existed outside of schools. And I don't know what the answer is to converting schools into radical spaces. I know that there are, of course, many wonderful initiatives, and you've obviously spoken about some of them. But I do think it's a huge challenge to somehow see the idea of the radical spaces within schools. I did just want to throw in, I put up in a little chat note, but I can't find it at the moment, but Kids Own Publishing Partnership in Ireland, which is separate to Kids Own Publishing in Australia, which both organisations I founded, but I'm not with either now, as I'm now doing a PhD. But they have had a long-running, maybe over 9 years, a virtually there artist in residency program. And I think you'd be very interested in looking at that, because it does focus on those long-term relationships. And that was something they came up with and had funding through the Irish government to run. And it's a small project, small ish project, but it's been going for a long time, and I think it's a really interesting one.
Thank you.
Take note of, but unfortunately their website seems to be down at the moment. I think it's been hacked, actually. So don't go there yet. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
Victoria, I wanted to put forward, you initiated almost a provocation there at the very beginning, when you talked about, the political funding of STEM and the arts. So basically what I think, this is a unique provocation for right now, and is that the arts actually promote science literacy and the understanding of the science of Earth and the environment, and the arts can do that. And I think that that's our provocation right now.
Yes, no, I would heartily agree with that, that it needs to be every which way round, art for art's sake, but particularly at this moment to understand. And I remember many years ago working with a colleague in London. I was the English advisory teacher and she was the science advisory teacher. And I remember her saying so clearly that stories and creativity are at the heart of all science, because without a story and understanding and a vision of how our world is and can be and has been, we cannot ask the right questions as scientists. I was always very struck by that.
Yeah, great, thank you. Would another person like to comment on that particular theme or the discussion so far, or shall we move on? No? Okay, let's move on to radical relationships then. What kind of radical relationships do you see in your work between the artist, teacher and student? Would somebody like to just comment on that theme in the findings and what we might have said, or the ideas that come to you?
I'm happy to give a few thoughts. So my name is Michael Solis. I'm in the Eastern Seaboard as well. I'm in Canberra at the moment. So it's air quality is back to hazardous today. We're much better off than a lot of other people at the moment. My role, I'm a freelance teaching artist and also artistic director of education for Music Aviva Australia, which increasingly is activating these long multi-year residencies in various schools. And one observation is certainly that I've had is certainly that the radical relationship between the artist, teacher and student is obviously critical. And I just really love the thing that you said at the end about how it's not a meeting of worlds, but a truly reciprocal dialogue and relationship. And you kind of pointed to that as being almost the key challenge just towards the end of the presentation about, I guess, the culture of I think you used the word entrenchment in terms of teaching. But one of the key relationships, I guess, is in terms of the overall ecology, is the importance of those school leadership, and not just school leadership, but department leaderships. Because really without that, you can have really motivated teachers, but if you don't have the really motivated school leaderships and then department leaderships to support that, these programs often are very difficult to be sustainable and to have that wider impact.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And in fact, because we were sort of on the ground for, I'm just responding to you, Michael, sorry, that, sorry, got it right, that we found very different layers of commitment in the school sites and contexts that we were in. So sometimes the project had been successful in terms of their bid to join the project and the funding, but the principal was new or the head of department was new and went, wait a minute, I've now got to run with this. And what we found over time was that different levels of that leadership kicked in different ways over the duration of the 3 years. So, projects sometimes started with really gung-ho head of department leadership, and that was a bit some of the teachers could be a bit suspicious about that to start with, was like, oh, here we go. But then other times there was kind of, they were floundering a bit for leadership, and then that grew out of that relationship between teachers and students and artists. So, you know, there's both work in different ways. But the beauty of time is that it allows that responsive to change part is part of that, you know, that sometimes direct leadership from the get-go works, and then other times, if it's allowed to evolve, it tends to be more authentic and sustaining. So we saw both different approaches with different results, but they were equally successful. Anyone else like to talk about radical relationships that they've seen in their work? No? Okay, what about dialogue? New exchanges, new conversations, resisting the codification of arts practice in the curriculum. Is there anyone that would like to talk about that?
Hello, I'm Mary Carroll. I'm normally based in Fort William, Scotland, and I've just finished a master's degree in art and social practice. And it's a brand new course run through Shetland UHI. And through one of the projects that I did, I use stick weaving a lot, and I use stick weaving with the children in a local primary school.
Yeah.
And we did an exchange between the children in the primary school and the residents in a care home.
Oh, lovely.
And actually, through the stick weaving, we managed to, and these were challenging children. That's basically why I got the class, because it's like, oh, you're an artist, you can, you know, you'll fill in the time there, it'll be something. Yeah. But actually, it was good for all concerned. I have an essay on the subject now as well, but it turned them round completely, because there were children that couldn't sit in a class, they couldn't sit still. But as soon as they started getting this, you know, it's a technique you can learn virtually in seconds. But we were going to build a big picture of a park to give to the people who couldn't, you know, the people in the care home that couldn't get out. And they were doing the same, but they wouldn't do pictures and things. They just told these stories for the children, or hidden in their weaving. But yeah, we have in Scotland the curriculum for excellence. And in actual fact, we managed to work with the teacher and pretty much covered the whole curriculum for excellence through stick weaving. And the children didn't even know that they were hitting all the boxes, which was absolutely brilliant. And then at the time we did, we covered quite a lot of it the time that I was with them, but obviously because it's just a course that I'm doing, I couldn't have a long embedded time with them. And however, the children were so enthused by it that they made the teacher they had a small amount of funds for their class, and they made the teacher send away, the day after I'd finished working with them, they came in the morning and asked her to send away to buy more sticks for the class. Even though I showed them how to do it with recycling, with felt pens, they couldn't wait to use up the class felt pens, they wanted the sticks now. So that then covered, the things that I hadn't covered were the numeracy. But they had a school Christmas fair coming up, so then you work out, well, how much wool do you need to make one snowman? And, you know, so there, and how much does that cost? So, you know, so if you take so much wool for one snowman, how much wool do you need for 10 snowmen? And how much are you going to then charge for your snowmen to make money so that you can buy more things and make a little bit of profit for the class? So that they were completely taken with that and completely wanted to cover all of that themselves. So it was brilliant.
Thank you. Anyone else like to talk about that, that theme? Thank you, Mary. Okay, the last question then. What's the radical practice of an artist working with a teacher in your work? And how does it assist and scaffold student agency? Anyone like to talk about that, the radical practice between teacher and artist? Or anything that we said that you'd like to respond to?
Hi, I'll jump in if no one else is.
Excellent, great.
My name is Brienne. I work in Stratford, which is just outside of Toronto in Canada. And I'm judging myself a little bit to jump into the conversation because we do theater, not visual art. I'm drawing quite a few parallels. And when it comes up to the relationship between artist and teacher, those are the relationships that we find are the strongest. It's harder to pull in a school board rep or principal because it's budgets, it's numbers. You know, art is something that can be on the edit room floor at the end of the day. Yeah. So I really love when we're able to work with local teachers, and I've got a program with the local school board where the teacher kind of reaches out to me through partnerships in the education department, and I connect her with an appropriate artist, an actor with us here at the festival that can, you know, fulfill what the teacher is trying to get into the classroom. And as much as I help the artist communicate with the teacher and craft what that topic is going to be about, as soon as we get into the classroom, the kids take it from there, right? And I think it allows a lot more confidence and outspoken nature of the students because it's an actor and it's not a teacher and we're not really in class time. So I love that it's free, but I also find a lot of challenges around helping make sure that we're meeting that teacher's goals through the programming. Also because I'm sending in an actor who isn't a teacher. And I'm wondering if you're finding that the same with artists. So it's framing it in a world of exploration and letting the kids have a say, but also coming back to the plan and the curriculum goal and the structure. I guess that's a challenge and also a positive at the same time.
Yeah. And we should say that because these were 3 sustained projects run in, you know, managed in and organised in different ways, the artists who were selected to participate were selected specifically for what they could bring in terms of their particular material practice, but also their capacity to work with communities and schools. And often those artists had a background already in working with schools or communities, and came in and some of them, the first project, the teachers chose the artists and they chose different types of artists each year. In the second project, the organisation specifically chose the Indigenous artists who wanted to work with culture and the school community more broadly. And in the third project, the organisation chose the artists who had a vision for 3 years for that school. So we had quite different models, but the importance of the organisation or a group really trying to strategically match the right artists with the school context who was aware of the school or the location or who were from there. That was a really important one, particularly for the aspirational impacts, because sometimes the students would say, you're from here and you're a professional artist and at this world scale. I mean, we had some of the artists who were going off to the Venice Biennale and in the middle of the project, you know, and had to have a little break, or who were doing an overseas tour as a dancer, etc. So, you know, they were starting to realise that they weren't just, that they were those artists were special for lots of reasons, and that they had a relationship with them, and that gave the students much more momentum, understanding that ordinary person they met in the classroom had this much bigger world that they were connected to. And I think that the importance that you've talked about there about selecting, not every artist can work in these deep ways in schools. And it has to be a partnership. And, you know, because these were sustained, that selectivity about who went and how that relationship was managed was really, really important. Rather than the fast track projects that are often the case where someone just jumps in and is out of their depth and has to sort of jump out very quickly. So I think you raise a point about the kind of sense of importance in that ecology, about planning, about, you know, all the players coming together to kind of work out what is the best fit for this particular school and community to have this particular artist or this particular type of artwork happening in that community.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to jump in on that?
Or has anyone else been in a situation where they've provided training or provided a bit of how-to before sending a teacher in? That I would be curious about too. Or not an artist, sending an artist in to a classroom.
There's a program in Australia called the School Drama Project, and they have actors working in classrooms, and they have a teacher working with the actor. So we can send you some information about that.
Sure, yeah, link me to it.
Have some extensive training, yeah.
I think also as another possibility in Australia, I know the Sydney Dance Company they do quite a rigorous training, I believe, for their teaching artists that do multi-year work in schools.
Yeah, that's the School Drama Project. Yeah.
Oh, that's part of that, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's just worth noting that we're starting to come to the end of the session now.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any burning questions or comments, maybe even that are more general that they want to contribute before we sort of wrap up and move over to an email chain, now is the moment to voice those before we wrap up.
Okay. All right. So my name is Peter Adalete, a teaching artist from Ghana. First of all, for Mary, thank you so much. Also, to be strong. So that is very wonderful. I think I just want to use this opportunity to inspire or encourage all of us to reach out. I mean, go to the schools, go to the communities, and exercise here means we need to be consistent with what we do in the schools. And I believe that makes a lot of impact in the world. We are so grateful. This is from Ghana.
Thank you.
Okay, I think unless there's any other burning things that people want to say, in which case interrupt me now. Otherwise, what we'll do now is say a very, very big thank you to our hosts, Christine and Mary, for taking us through all of that. And I'll now just do a quick reminder that we record the audio for these sessions. And so if there's anything that has been mentioned that you don't want included in the audio that's published online, email me afterwards to let me know. I will also start an email chain, or try to, with everyone who's on the call here. So if you're thinking about this later and a question comes to you, we can all be connected that way to ask something. It would also be great, I noticed Victoria asked the question before she signed off about Christine and Mary, if any of your published works are available online and if she can read more that way. So maybe you could share those links with the email chain too.
Sure.
And similarly, I think Michael mentioned another program that's operating in Sydney, and a few people had suggestions of where we could look for toolkits and research. So that's the place that we can all come together and share those. If you don't want included in that email chain, that's totally fine. Again, I'll leave a pause before I do that. It'll be tomorrow morning my time now that happens. So you have a few hours to opt out of any of these things or redact anything at all. That being said, thank you so much for everyone for joining. I'll do another little plug that these happen every month. So do sign up and come along. If you know anyone who's doing interesting work, who's pioneering a sector, let us know and we'll try and get them to host something for us as well. Spread the word, share stories on the website about the work that you've been doing, upload significant moments to our timeline on the website so that we can build a cohesive international timeline of our field. That doesn't really exist yet, so we're in the process of building that. Also, if you aren't subscribed to ITAC yet, make sure you are. Email me or do it on the website. There are some recent funding opportunities that are up now, and so we are in the process of beginning new work and new projects. So let us know if you haven't seen any of that or you want to be linked to any of that. Thank you very much, and I will wrap us up now.
Okay.
See you later, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.